Marlon Brando's Secret Children, Hollywood's darkest family secret. 11 official children, at least 3 different continents, more than 5 women, countless secret affairs. And one question, what was the real number? Marlon Brando's family tree is one of Hollywood's most complex and mysterious puzzles. Some of his children grew up in the media spotlight. Some had their paternity proven through DNA tests, and some remain controversial to this day. So how did no one notice that one of the world's most famous actors had so many children? To answer this question, I want to share a memory. In 2004, just days after Marlon Brando's death, an extraordinary meeting was held in a lawyer's office in Los Angeles. 11 different people sat around the table, and all of them claimed to be Marlon Brando's children. But the strange thing was this. Even the lawyers weren't sure which of these people were actually Brando's children, because Brando himself didn't know exactly how many children he had in the final years of his life. And those sitting at the table that day were only the ones who managed to show up. Around the world, there were perhaps dozens more people carrying Brando's blood, but who never met their father, or didn't even know he was their father. If you want to hear the rest of this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you is one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets. Marlon Brando's family drama began in 1957, or perhaps it started much earlier, but the world first noticed that year. Brando was 33 years old, and at the peak of his career, he had won 2 Oscars for A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, and had become Hollywood's most sought-after actor. And right at that moment, he married Anna Kashfi. Anna presented herself as an Indian-born actress, and her exotic beauty and mysterious past had enchanted Brando. But immediately after their marriage, a scandal broke. Anna's real name was Joan O'Callaghan, and she wasn't from India but from an ordinary town in England. Her entire identity was a lie. Most people would have ended the marriage immediately in this situation. But Brando was different. Perhaps because he saw the lies and masks within himself, he understood Anna. Or maybe he didn't care much because he was already involved with other women at the time. Whatever the case, the marriage continued, and in 1958, their first child, Christian Devi Brando, was born. But this happiness lasted only 16 months. In 1959, the couple divorced, and the custody battle that became one of the ugliest and longest fights in Hollywood history. According to court records, this war lasted exactly 20 years. For 20 years, Anna and Marlon kidnapped little Christian from each other, went to court, and accused each other. But in the midst of this drama, there was something no one noticed. Brando was already with another woman, and she was about to become pregnant. While fighting Anna in court, Brando was simultaneously having an affair with Movita Castaneda. Movita was the complete opposite of Anna. A Mexican actress, Movita was 20 years older than Brando, and had previously been married to the famous boxer Jack Dempsey. And right here, the first signs of how chaotic Brando's family structure would become began to appear. In 1960, Movita gave birth to Miko Castaneda Brando. But Brando and Movita weren't married. In fact, Brando hadn't even officially divorced Anna yet. So Miko was already part of a complex family structure from the moment he was born. But the story didn't end there either. In 1962, Movita gave birth to a second child, Rebecca Brando. Now Brando had 3 children from 2 different women and still didn't have a proper marriage with either of them. Christian was living in his mother's house in Los Angeles, while Miko and Rebecca were growing up with Movita in another house. And where was Brando himself? He usually wasn't at either one, because in 1962, he had gone to Tahiti to film Mutiny on the Bounty, and there he would meet someone who would change his life forever. But before that meeting, you need to understand something. Why was Brando living such a chaotic life? Why was he jumping from one family to another, from one woman to another? The answer might lie in his own childhood. Brando's mother was an alcoholic, and his father was an emotionally cold, even cruel man. Marlon had never experienced real family warmth in his childhood. And now as an adult, he was giving his own children the same emptiness. Maybe he wasn't even aware of it, but he was following in his father's footsteps. In June of 1962, Marlon Brando sat in a restaurant in Papeete, Tahiti, watching the warm tropical breeze hit his face. The filming of Mutiny on the Bounty was about to begin, and the crew had just arrived on the island. Brando had come here only to shoot a film, but he didn't yet know he would spend the rest of his life here. That evening, a young Tahitian woman working as a waitress in the restaurant caught his attention. Her name was Tarita Teripaya. She was only 20 years old, and Brando was 18 years older than her. Tarita's exotic beauty mesmerized Brando, but what really affected him was Tarita's innocence and naturalness, far removed from the showiness of the Western world. Within a few weeks, Tarita took a role in Mutiny on the Bounty and became Brando's partner, both on screen and off-screen. The attraction between them was so strong that during filming, Brando decided to marry Tarita. But of course, things weren't that simple. Brando still hadn't ended his relationship with Movita, and the court battles with Anna continued. Nevertheless, Tarita became pregnant at the end of 1962, and in 1963 their first child, Simon Tehutu Brando, was born. Brando was now the father of 4 children, Christian, Miko, Rebecca, and now Tehutu, but life in Tahiti had touched Brando's soul. Tired of Hollywood's artificiality, fakeness, and constant media pressure, Brando believed he had found peace in Tahiti. In 1966, Tarita gave birth to their second child, Tarita Cheyenne Brando. He now had 5 children from 3 different women. But for Brando, this wasn't enough. That same year, he bought a small island called Tetiaroa, an atoll consisting of 12 small islets, and Brando wanted to turn this into his own paradise. His plan was simple. He would completely abandon Hollywood, live in Tahiti, raise his children in harmony with nature, and stay away from films. Of course, this plan never fully materialized, because Brando needed money and couldn't manage to completely disconnect from Hollywood. But the real issue was elsewhere. Brando was living just as chaotic a life in Tahiti as he had in Los Angeles. Despite being married to Tarita, he was seen with other women on the island, and in Papati, and this situation formed the basis of a truth that would emerge in the coming years. Brando could have unknown children in Tahiti too. In 1972, with The Godfather, Brando was back on Hollywood's agenda. He won his 3rd Oscar for the role of Don Vito Corleone, but didn't go to accept the award. Instead, he sent a Native American activist named Sachin Littlefeather. This move resonated around the world, but no one noticed this. Brando was constantly traveling back and forth to Tahiti during this period, and was seen with different women each time. One of Brando's close friends, director Francis Ford Coppola, said years later in an interview, Marlon didn't even know himself how many children he had. Every time he went to Tahiti, it was as if he was starting a new family. By the 1980s, some numbers were beginning to become clear. Christian, Miko, Rebecca, Tehutu, and Cheyenne were officially Brando's children. But these 5 children were only the known ones, those on record. According to rumors circulating in Tahiti, Brando had at least 3 more children from different villages. The mothers of these children were local women who had only brief relationships with Brando. But Brando was providing them with financial support. He sent a certain amount of money every month, but never took on parental responsibility. As the children grew up, some learned they were Brando's children, while others never found out. And right at this point, Brando's family structure began to completely spiral out of control, because it turned out he had children not only in Tahiti, but in other places as well. In 1976, Marlon Brando went to the Philippines for the filming of Apocalypse Now. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, this film is known as one of the most difficult productions in cinema history. The shoot was a complete nightmare. Typhoons destroyed the set. Brando came unprepared, had gained weight, and hadn't read the script. But in the midst of this chaos, everything was normal for Brando. Because in the Philippines, he also met a new woman. Maria Cristina Ruiz was Brando's housekeeper. Initially, she only cleaned Brando's house and cooked, but over time, a closeness developed between them. Maria was a young woman, came from a poor family, and was far from Hollywood's glamour. Perhaps that's why Brando was interested in her. Maria and Brando's relationship remained secret for years because Maria was a married woman. But in 1988, Maria had 3 children, and all of them were Brando's: Nina Priscilla, Miles Jonathan, and Timothy Gahan. Now Brando's official child count had risen to 8. But even this wasn't the full number, because during the same period, there was another woman in Los Angeles. A nurse named Caroline Barrett had a brief affair with Brando, and from this relationship came 2 children, Nina and Raiatua. Caroline kept being the mother of Brando's children secret for years, until Brando's will was revealed. In the will, shares had been allocated to Caroline's children, which meant their official recognition as Brando's children. Now there were 10 children in total, but the real number was still unknown. One of Brando's friends, actor Dennis Hopper, said in an interview, "Marlon once told me this, Dennis, I don't know how many children I have. Everywhere I go, someone comes up to me and says you're my father, and I believe them because the dates add up." Hopper was laughing when he said these words, but he was actually describing a tragic truth. Brando really didn't know how many children he had in the final years of his life. When Brando's health began to deteriorate in 2001, his lawyers tried to compile a list of all his children. This list contained 11 names: Christian, Miko, Rebecca, Tehutu, Cheyenne, Nina, Miles, Timothy, Nina, Raiatua, and one more child. The 11th child was Petra Brando Fisher, born from a brief relationship of Brando's in the 1970s. But even as the lawyers prepared this list, they weren't sure, because there were letters coming from Tahiti, the Philippines, and even Mexico. In these letters, some people claimed that they or their children were Brando's children. A lawyer later recounted, "When we were trying to distribute Mr. Brando's estate, our biggest problem was determining who was really his child. We had children with DNA tests, but some had no documentation whatsoever. There was only their mother's word, and the fact that Mr. Brando was in that region at those times. We didn't know what to do. In the end, we only gave inheritance shares to the documented children, but I don't know if that was fair." And here's the question that comes up. Why was Marlon Brando so irresponsible? Why did he have relationships with so many women, and why didn't he take care of his children? Some psychologists say Brando suffered from Peter Pan syndrome. He never grew up, never took responsibility. Others claim he was a sex addict, but the truth is perhaps much more complex. The story of Brando's children isn't just about numbers. The real tragedy lies in what kind of life these children lived. And the most painful example of this tragedy is hidden in Cheyenne Brando's story. Cheyenne was the daughter of Brando and his Tahitian wife Tarita. Born in 1970, she grew up on the paradise-like islands of Tahiti. Her childhood was seemingly idyllic. She ran in tropical forests, swam in the ocean, lived without any worries. But the reality wasn't like that at all. Brando rarely came to Tahiti, and even when he came, he didn't pay much attention to his children. Cheyenne constantly tried to win her father's love, but never succeeded. As an adult, she became a famous model, a rising star in the Paris fashion world. But the emptiness inside her never filled. In 1989, Cheyenne met a young Tahitian man named Dag Drolet and fell in love. The two got engaged, and Cheyenne became pregnant. But the happiness didn't last long. On May 16, 1990, a horrific incident occurred at the Brando mansion in Los Angeles. Cheyenne's half-brother Christian Brando shot and killed Dag Drolet. Christian claimed that Dag was abusing Cheyenne, but the truth was much more complex. Because Cheyenne was pregnant, she couldn't testify in court, and Christian went to prison for manslaughter. But for Cheyenne, the real trauma was just beginning. After her baby was born, Cheyenne completely collapsed. She fell into severe depression, made several suicide attempts, and was treated in psychiatric hospitals. Brando tried to be there for his daughter, but it was too late. Cheyenne blamed her father. In her view, Brando's irresponsible lifestyle and indifference toward his family had led to all these tragedies. On April 16, 1995, Cheyenne hanged herself at her mother's house in Tahiti. She was only 25 years old. Cheyenne's suicide devastated Brando. His friends say Brando was never the same after this incident. He began to gain excessive weight, fell into depression, and completely disconnected from the world. But the painful part was that Cheyenne's death didn't change Brando's relationship with his other children either. He was still distant, still indifferent. He sent money to his children, but couldn't establish an emotional connection. After Christian Brando got out of prison, he struggled with drug and alcohol addiction throughout his life. When he died of pneumonia in 2008, he was only 49 years old. Brando's eldest son died just 4 years after his father, and never lived a happy life. When some newspapers reported Christian's death, they wrote, "Brando's cursed son has passed away." And perhaps there really was a curse. Perhaps Brando's irresponsibility had left his children not just material wealth as an inheritance, but also emotional devastation. But what happened to the other children? Miko Brando started working alongside his father and became a production assistant in Hollywood. He was perhaps the one who lived the most stable life among the Brando family children. Rebecca Brando also led a quiet life and stayed away from the media. Taihotu and the other Tahitian children continued to live on the island, sometimes seeing their father but mostly living their own lives. The Filipino children Nina, Miles, and Timothy moved to America and grew up with Brando's financial support. But what they all had in common was this: none of them could establish a real relationship with their father. On July 4, 2004, Marlon Brando died at the age of 80. The cause of death was respiratory failure and a heart attack, but in reality, Brando had been dying for years. In his last decade, he barely left the house, just sat at home, ate tons of food, and watched television. The autopsy performed after his death found that his body weighed over 160 kilograms. The once most handsome actor was now unrecognizable. But the real shock came when his will was revealed. Brando's will was exactly 30 pages long and mentioned the names of 11 children. His estate was estimated at around $100 million, and this money would be distributed equally among his children. But there was another clause in the will, and this clause surprised all the lawyers. If in the future other people emerge claiming to be my children and prove this with DNA tests, they will also be given equal shares. What did this clause mean? Did Brando think that even after his death, other children of his might emerge? Apparently yes, because the lawyer who prepared the will later made this statement. "Mr. Brando told me, I've been with many women throughout my life, and I don't remember all of them. If they had a child from me and can prove it with DNA, they have a right too." And indeed, after the will was revealed, a few more people came forward. In 2005, a woman from Tahiti claimed that her daughter was Brando's child and requested a DNA test. The test was done, and the result came back positive. The girl really was Brando's daughter. Now the total child count was 12. In 2007, another woman from the Philippines came forward, saying her son was Brando's. This time the test came back negative, but the woman insisted and filed a lawsuit. The case went on for years, and eventually the woman lost. But the most interesting claim came in 2010. A man from Mexico said he was Brando's son. The man explained that his mother had worked with Brando on a film in Mexico in the 1960s, and they had a brief relationship. When a DNA test was requested, a problem arose. Brando's body had been cremated, and it was impossible to take a DNA sample.
so DNA was taken from Brando's other children for comparison. The result was this: the man was probably Brando's son, but it wasn't 100% certain. The court rejected the man's request on the grounds that there wasn't sufficient evidence. But everyone knew this: the man was probably really Brando's son. Today in 2026, people still occasionally come forward claiming to be Brando's children. Most are rejected, but some might be real, because Brando himself didn't know how many children he had. In Tahiti, in the Philippines, in Mexico, maybe even in different states of America, there could be people carrying Brando's blood, but who will never be recognized. Miko, one of Brando's children, said in an interview, "My father was a great actor, but a terrible father. He would say he loved us, but he was never there. He would send money but wouldn't show interest, and now he's dead, but new siblings keep emerging." How absurd is that, right? How does a man not know his own children? Marlon Brando's story isn't just the story of a talented actor, but also the story of a man who ran from responsibility, feared commitment, and ultimately drowned in his own loneliness. He had 11 official children, maybe 12 or 13, but the real number will never be known, because throughout his life, Brando was with so many women that even he lost track. Today, Brando's children are scattered around the world. Some live in Hollywood, some on Tahiti's quiet islands, some in the Philippines. They all live different lives, but they all have one thing in common: they could never establish a real relationship with their father. Brando left them money, but didn't leave them love. He gave them his surname, but didn't give them his time. He brought them into the world, but never became a real father. Perhaps what's most tragic is this: Brando's childhood was like this too. Alcoholic mother, cold father, a loveless home. And throughout his life, Brando tried to break this cycle but couldn't. On the contrary, he subjected his own children to the same cycle. The tragic ends of Christian and Cheyenne are the most painful examples of this. Both died young, both lived unhappy lives, and both were victims of their father's neglect. So what can we learn from Marlon Brando? Perhaps this: talent, fame, and money don't make you a good person. Brando was perhaps one of the greatest actors in history, but he definitely wasn't a good father. On screen he made thousands of people cry, laugh, and feel moved. But in his own home, beside his own children, he only left emptiness. Today in Hollywood, Brando's name is still mentioned with respect. Films like The Godfather, A Streetcar Named Desire, and On the Waterfront have become classics. But what is Brando's real legacy? Perhaps 15 or 20 children scattered around the world, some recognized and some unrecognized. And all of these children share a common story: having a world-famous father but never tasting that father's love. One final note: if you also think you're Marlon Brando's child, you can still file an inheritance lawsuit. This is clearly written in Brando's will, but remember, you'll need a DNA test. And since Brando's body was cremated, you'll need to make the comparison with his other children, which means you first have to find them, and that's perhaps the hardest part, because Brando's children don't even fully know each other. This is the legacy left by one of Hollywood's biggest stars: a broken family, lost children, and a question that will never be answered. What was the real number? 11? 15? 20? Perhaps we'll never know. And perhaps this will remain Marlon Brando's greatest secret.